Hello there, ladies and gentlemen, and in today's video I'm going to be doing a review of my favourite product for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, which is Tales from the Yawning Portal. Now this actually came out last year, however I wanted to give a good look into it. I wanted to get back into the hobby of Dungeons & Dragons properly and really give this product a good test and a good run through before I did any sort of review on it for you. And that is what today's video is all about. Now on the front cover here, I think we should just appreciate the artwork of Durnan, the proprietor of the Yawning Portal, which is an inn in Waterdeep. And this artwork is done by a gentleman called Tyler Jacobson. Absolutely fantastic. In the background we can also see an array of different characters as well, which is really brilliant. Now if you are not familiar with this book and are new to the art of dungeon mastering, then this is a definite purchase that you should be making, because this combines some of the most well-known adventures in Dungeons and Dragons history, and the top 7 of them. I gotta be honest, this top 7 list that they have here, or some of the best dungeons that they've collected, aren't the adventures that I would have personally put into this book. However, they are still really great to play and really great to read through, and they're all converted for 5th edition, so they all have the 5th edition rules, easy to read, easy to understand, absolutely fantastic, and we're going to take a little look at that now. So as soon as we open the book, we have a little bit of information here. We have a content page, the credit page, all that kind of thing. You can see we actually have these 7 adventures, and I'll go through the list here for you. We have the Sunless Citadel, the Forge of Fury, the Hidden Shrine of Tamawachan, White Plume Mountain, Dead in Thay, Against the Giant, and the Tomb of Horrors. As well as we have Appendix A and B, A being magical items that you can find in these adventures, and B being some creatures there for you as well. There are also a collection of maps relating to all of these adventures, which are incredibly useful. Really, this entire book is going to be about 220 odd pages, give or take. It's a decent sized book, but it's not massive. It contains enough information for you to run a detailed adventure, but there's also room in there, and this is what I love. There's room in there to add your own content, to make it a little bit more interesting and to tie characters in. Now, I should also say, guys, this leads me to one of my biggest problems with this book. You can see that all these adventures, if you know anything about these adventures, you know that these adventures will take your characters up in levels. So we start off with level 1 to 3, I think it's like 4 to 5 there. It takes your characters up in levels. However, there's nothing, absolutely nothing connecting these adventures together. Meaning that as the DM, there's a lot of work in putting these adventures into practice. This is more a book that I would use to flesh out a larger campaign, to add some sort of nostalgia back into your game. Now, they do make some attempt to allow you to add this content in by talking a little bit about the Yawning Portal, kind of like, maybe when you're running the game, you are approached by a stranger in this tavern, and those strangers turn around and give you a quest. That being said, guys, I think this is a very generic way of introducing your players to a quest line. I think there are much better ways of doing it, but they do offer you this fallback. One of the biggest issues, in my opinion, is the Yawning Portal, which is described here, as well as Durnan the Innkeeper, is the home to the largest dungeon in Dungeons & Dragons history, and that is Undermountain. Now, way back in the day, they actually released some box sets for Undermountain, and in 4th edition, they actually came out with a book about some adventures in Undermountain. However, it's such a vast and massive labyrinth of dungeons and horrors and treasures that it's really difficult to describe in any significant detail what Undermountain is like. So this book kind of gives you a site of interest, the Yawning Portal, in which your players might really want to explore. However, it gives you no information about Undermountain really at all. I mean, this brief introduction is 2 pages long. Four pages long, I should say, sorry. There's really not a lot of detail here at all. So I would say if you are talking about the Yawning Portal, you should go and pick up some of the other books and other products for the Yawning Portal. Now, my personal favourite, and the one that I think people can get their hands on the easiest, and the one that I think people will get the most use out of, is if your players are really curious about Undermountain, because you are using the Yawning Portal as sort of the main focus point of adventure, then I do highly recommend Halls of Undermountain for Dungeons and Dragons 4th edition. Now, a couple of you might hear 4th edition and be repulsed by the idea, but this has some amazing content in it and some really great little adventures and ideas going on. So I'll just flick a couple of pages there. What it does is it sort of lays out the first floor of Undermountain and some adventures to be had there. As I said, because Undermountain is just so huge, I will show you a map actually of Undermountain. Because Undermountain is just so huge, as you can see, this is the first floor. You really don't need any more than this one floor for the players to get a sense of how big this cavern is. So I would say this one book, if your players are curious about the Yawning Portal and about Undermountain, this one book should be more than enough. And what it also does, and I really like this, it gives you the tavern floor of the Yawning Portal. So this is the giant hole in the centre of the Yawning Portal. That's where Durnan would probably stand. So this is a great little addition if you wanted to feature the Yawning Portal as a sort of main site for adventure. So back to the actual book that I'm reviewing in this video, because I tend to get sidetracked quite a lot in these videos. We're going to take a look into the first adventure, being the Sunless Citadel. Now, one thing I would say is a lot of these adventures, because it's very typical with older adventures, they are very much, I would consider, dungeon crawls. So for that reason, guys, you've got to remember that with dungeon crawls, things like preparation and letting your players know as well, like preparing for a dungeon crawl is important. Exploring dungeons can be very treacherous. Every room has something terrifying in it. So as a DM, make sure your players are able to well stock up their supplies, get ready, and they know the dangers within. One thing I like about the setup of this book is that it's all really the same, right? I could turn to any chapter and it would be the same sort of thing. They have a rough background information right at the top here, followed by, as well as some really nice artwork, which sort of sets the theme for the adventure. They have an adventure synopsis, so you get an idea of how these adventures work. And one thing you should notice as well is the adventure synopsis can really sort of tell you how many sessions the adventure might take to complete. For example, I would say with this particular adventure, I played 2 long adventures and was able to finish the Sunless Citadel. However, I did miss out several sections. However, if you really want your players to explore all of the Sunless Citadel, you might want to break it up into 4 sections for them to run and enjoy and explore this sort of dungeon. But you've got an adventure synopsis which tells you, and is really useful as a DM, what the hell happens in this adventure. And then we've got information about running the adventure. I'm just going to do a quick little zoom in here. There we are, guys. So I've just zoomed in. We've got an information about running the adventure, and this is really interesting. I actually had a friend asking me about, well, where are these adventures set? Well, originally, guys, a lot of these adventures were set in the land of Greyhawk. However, we know now that Wizards of the Coast tend to set their adventures in the Forgotten Realms. They actually have information on Greyhawk, Forgotten Realms, Eberron, and Dragonlance for setting all of these adventures in. And as long as you meet the rough sort of idea of where these are set, you should be fine, guys. So, it has a lot of information regarding, for example, for the Forgotten Realms, it says here, On Faerun, the Sunless Citadel was once a secret stronghold of the cult of the dragons. Located in the foothills northwest of Thunder Tree, it plunged into the earth when, I cannot pronounce that name, Mount Hotonau erupted and threw Neverwinter into chaos. So you get a rough idea of a brief background and the setting of it, which comes in very handy as a DM. However, guys, I think that a lot of this is just to sort of direct newer dungeon masters in setting it. Any experienced DM will know that as long as they meet the rough setting locations, then they should be fine. And Oakhurst is such a small town, which is the setting of this adventure, you can see here in part 1, that it's such a small town that it doesn't really matter where you set it. So as is typical in 5th edition sort of fashion, we have these little boxes here which you can read out to your players, as well as, if we look here, we have things about talking about creatures and treasures. Anything in bold is something of interest that the DM might need to know. Because these modules are so short, they're not full campaigns, as with every other D&D 5th edition accessory. Because they're not full campaigns, it's very easy to just go, this sounds interesting, let me have a quick little flick through here, get an idea of what this adventure is like, and start running it. I would say you're not quite able to just pick it up and on the fly run it. I think that a little bit of prep will go a long way with these kind of modules. However, guys, if that is your style, then I think there's nothing wrong with doing so. Another thing that's quite interesting with these guys is that the dungeons are quite vast, right? I think that when I ran this particular adventure, I found that it was a little bit difficult to describe the exact layout of these sort of dungeons. You can see this map here is quite an extravagant sort of map. And even trying to draw a map like this out is really difficult. But that being said, guys, creativity and ingenuity has always been one of the most interesting things to sort of witness when it comes to Dungeons and Dragons. So making this your own, maybe trimming this dungeon down in size a little bit, which is something that I did, tends to work quite well, and the players don't know any different, especially if they're new players. So it all works very well with a little bit of prep work in advance. And just like that, guys, we finish through the Sunless Citadel. However, every single one has a little bit about aftermath, about what happens in the adventure, a little bit of background information you've got here. So I would say a little bit of reading in advance goes a long way. Now what I'm showing you here, guys, is actually the map for Dead in Thay. Now this is a map that you can actually give to the players here, which is really interesting, really cool dungeon. But it sort of highlights my point when I said that running an adventure like this, just on the fly, is a very difficult thing to do because it's so big and all the rooms are so difficult to explain to your players. I would say that some of the maps that are in this book you can't really go giving out to players. It's one of those that I would not personally recommend that you just go giving, every single map out, because they do show some secret areas. However, a map like this is designed so that you can give this out. But it does show my point that trying to run this without looking through it first is quite a challenging task for any DM. Again, guys, we're on a section here of Dead in Thay. One thing that I wanted to say is that the adventures in general are very well keyed out and labelled out. One thing that I found with reading older adventures is that they tend to be set out a little bit awkwardly, and trying to convert them requires a little bit of time and a little bit of effort. However, because they've set this out so brilliantly and they've converted them so magnificently, you definitely do have a lot of room to play around and a lot of details that you would be sort of scrabbling for normally. So I just wanted to highlight this page. You've got to see the section here of this dungeon, everything laid out really nicely. You can just take a quick glance at this page and you know instantly what the light sources here are. What bits you want to read out to your players, what monsters are in this area, and can you find some of these monsters in the monster manual, or are they going to be in Appendix B with some monsters there for you? So all of this is really well labelled, which I think is an absolute super important thing that Wizards of the Coast has done, is to make sure that they label this brilliantly for new DMs and for returning DMs that want to play it for 5th edition. So the last sections of this book, we have a small thing about magic items that are featured in these adventures, and there's not too many, but they are very nice items that you can give out, as well as some new creatures. Here we have, a centaur mummy. All of these things are converted from older editions up to 5th edition, so that we can easily sort of put them into our game, and we have nice stat blocks for all of them that are really easy for 5th edition DMs to understand. So really, guys, what are my closing thoughts for Tales of the Yawning Portal? I have sort of mixed reviews on it, to be honest with you. On one hand, I think that this is an absolute must-include product. I think every single Dungeon Master should own Tales of the Yawning Portal. It's fantastic. And I don't think that anybody, whether you run all of these adventures or just one or two, is going to regret buying this book. That being said, guys, I think that it doesn't work particularly well with the Dungeons and Dragons campaigns that they've released for 5th edition. Because those campaigns are so tight-knit, they're so difficult to expand upon without altering the story massively. It's really difficult to include one or even two adventures from Tales of the Yawning Portal because there's just simply no room to add them in. As well as that, it would mess up the whole level caps of certain adventures, so I don't know. If you are looking for making some homebrew adventures, maybe you're running a homebrew campaign, even one or two homebrew adventures, I highly recommend Tales of the Yawning Portal, provided you can think a little bit on the fly about how you're going to tie these adventures into one another. Maybe you're running a couple of other companies' one-shot adventures. For example, Kobold Press do a series called Prepared. For example, if you're running a few of those, Tales of the Yawning Portal is just a better version of that. It's just more detailed, more extravagant, with brilliant stories and fantastically fun adventures. So I highly recommend this book, depending on where you are as a DM. If you're running a lot of homebrew stuff, pick this up. It's going to help you out. If you are running, I'm running the Curse of Strahd, or I am running, Tomb of Annihilation, you're going to have a hard time fitting these adventures into those stories, guys. However, I recommend it because it's going to inspire you further down the line, and you're never going to, regret a purchase where you're getting 7 brilliant adventures from Dungeons and Dragons history in one package.